Now I've got a little red thing.
There we go. Hello, everybody. This is Ann Angela Webb. This is the Animal Intuitive Show. We had a little bit of a tech issue there, but I think we've got it now. I'm here with Dr. Temple Grandin, and this is, as I said, the Animal Intuitive Show.
Come on, all you doggies, won't you walk with me? I'm the puppet dog.
Yeah, we were streaming in a different live URL, but now we're in the right one. I clicked a wrong button, but we're here. We're good now. I think we're on the right one. Okay, so Dr. Grandin is an innovator, an author, a speaker in the worlds of animal behavior and handling and autism activism. We're going to be discussing her ability to think like the animals, as well as Dr. Grandin's latest book that she wrote with psychologist Debra Moore, Navigating Autism, 9 Mindsets for Helping Kids on the Spectrum. And Dr. Grandin is currently a Colorado State University professor of animal sciences and renowned animal behaviorist. And because of that, we're also going to be talking about her background working with animals and in the livestock industry. And on a personal note, her groundbreaking book, Animals in Translation, was a big influence early on in my professional animal communication career and has continued to influence me. So if you're here in the chat, just letting you know, you can ask questions of Dr. Grandin. She's been humble and kind enough and, to do that and to be here to answer questions. I know we sort of have a varied audience tonight. We have people coming who are here for the animal side of things, then we have people who are here for the interest in the autism side of things, and then we have people here for both. So I'm definitely here for both. I'm interested to hear everything you have to say. So, Dr. Grandin, welcome.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get started because I know you have a deadline, you have a plane to catch in the morning. So, Dr. Grandin, you have a recent book out. I have to start somewhere. So I'm going to start with the recent book and her focus on autism. So if you could just tell us a little bit about this most recent book and what made you put this book out now? You've written so many books. So what?
Well, I have my autobiography, Thinking in Pictures. But one of the reasons for this book is I'm getting very concerned that a lot of kids are getting so locked into the label that they're not having all their abilities, being utilized. Debra Moore calls this label locking, and she emphasizes the importance of looking at the whole child. I've worked with a lot of people out in construction that were really good at designing equipment that were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, and they took welding in school, and they started inventing things and having patents. And then you go up to Silicon Valley, and a lot of those programmers are probably autistic. But I'm seeing too many kids get an autism label, and they're not getting exposed to enough different things to find out what they're good at. For me, it was drawing. For another child, it might be music. For another kid, it might be mathematics. Maybe the child needs to be moved into higher mathematics. I think it's a real problem if kids don't get exposed to enough things. I got interested in cattle because I got exposed to them when I was a teenager. When you look at where people go in successful careers, there's 2 things: exposure, and then later on, mentoring. I had a great science teacher because I was a bad student, and he got me interested in studying to get to a goal. There were some good people out in the industry that saw some of my drawings and seeked me out to design facilities. And they served as mentors on just basic stuff like getting my business started. There's just basic things like that have to be done.
Okay.
And I want to see kids get out and be everything that can be. Autism varies from someone who cannot dress themselves to Elon Musk. Elon Musk is autistic. I've always thought so. I had this book marked up years ago where I thought he was autistic, but now he's announced it publicly. Einstein would land in an autism class today.
Okay.
No speech until age 3. See, this is the problem. And I want to get kids out doing things. Yeah, another book that came up with The Outdoor Scientist. Get kids out doing things. And one of the projects is observing animals.
Okay.
And observing, okay, what does a squirrel do to bury a nut? During the lockdown, that was one of the things I did. And he'll dig a hole and then try it quite a few times to make sure it's deep enough, and then it'll cover it.
Very neat.
But just get kids observing things like that. Get them outside, and we've got to get these kids off the video games. Because I'm seeing a lot of kids with an autism label ending up in the basement playing video games, not learning how to work, and out in the industry, I can tell you, visual thinkers, they're out there to keep the power plant running. We need them.
Yeah, in general, it seems like it would be good if kids were out more. Not even just in the autism community, but...
well, that's right. But the thing is, I think it hurts the autism kids more than some of the other kids.
Sure, yeah.
Another thing I talk about all the time is different kinds of thinking. I'm an extreme visual thinker. And that helped me in my work with animals. Because some of the very first work I ever did with cattle was to get down in the chutes where they went up to be vaccinated. And I noticed they'd walk at a shadow. They'd stop at a shadow. They'd stop at a coat on the fence. So I took a camera and got down inside the chute and took pictures of it. And a lot of people thought that was pretty weird. But at the time that I was doing it, when I was in my 20s, I didn't know that other people, a lot of them think in words. I thought everybody thought in pictures the same way I think. Now when it comes to people with autism, some are visual thinkers like me, object visualizers. Some are mathematical thinkers, which are pattern thinkers. And there's some that are word thinkers. These are often the kids that love history and they love facts. And you got to take that thing they're interested in and expand it. I mean, I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. And mother said, well, let's draw the whole horse. Let's draw the stable. You got to take that interest and broaden it and expand it.
Okay. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was, I was listening to your book, because I was listening to it on Audible, but I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I actually used to do some work with kids in autism, but also in mental health. But in general, it was like the whole concept of the system of care, and you were talking about starting with the diagnosis. And I was just wondering if you could just tell us, what do you think is most important to say to parents whose kids are going through that, and the parents are going through that process, or maybe they've just started it?
Well, there's kind of two ways to get diagnosed. You get the early intervention kids, which would be me. No speech at age 2, no speech at age 3. It's obviously something's wrong with the kid, and they get an autism diagnosis. I was that type. Then you get where there's no speech delay, and has no friends when he's maybe 12 years old, 8 years old, and gets an autism diagnosis. Now, I want to emphasize autism diagnosis is behavioral profile. It is not precise like a COVID Delta variant. Now there's a subvariant of Delta, where they can tell you very specifically with a lab test exactly what you've got. Autism, you have certain characteristics, and you get an autism label. When does slightly nerdy and not that social become autism? There's no black and white dividing line. The big problem I'm seeing now is we're doing a better job with the early intervention. Start working with these kids really young. I was in early intervention by 2.5. But where we're having problems is the transition period. You may have a fully verbal kid, and then they've not learned any working skills. And I have granddads come up to me all the time that discover they're autistic when their kids get diagnosed. But that grandfather, maybe an accountant, an engineer, or some other job, and a paper route when he was 11. So he learned how to work. So what we need to be doing is finding substitutes for paper routes, like a volunteer job at a community center. Something where it's on a schedule outside the home where somebody else is the boss. I'm seeing too many kids today where they're not learning things like shopping, handling money, things I was doing in elementary school. You've got teenagers that are going in a store and just buying something.
Yeah.
Learning how to talk to the staff in the store. It's really, really basic stuff. This is an example of what Debra Moore in Navigating Autism calls label locking, where they just don't see the kid, they just see the label.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of us are forgetting how to go in a store
Well,
anyway.
it's really
So
important for the autistic kids. When seeing parents that can't let go, when I just suggest, have a kid run in the store and buy a loaf of bread. You know, and you're right outside the door. I mean, start off with baby steps.
right.
And
Okay.
learning the most basic things. Because when I got out working with the big meat plants, I worked with welding guys that had big shops that was selling equipment around the world. There were stutterers, autistic, dyslexic, and they'd taken a single welding class. And then I go to an autism meeting, and here's a 10-year-old who's addicted to video games. And they've never had a chance to do any hands-on things. Welding's not for everybody, but you don't know until you try it.
Right.
But the visual thing is like, we're good with animal, we're good with art, we're good with mechanical things, anything mechanical, figuring out mechanical things. The mathematical minds, engineering, computer programming, physics, chemistry, and then the word thinkers, of course, are good with words. Writing is something they'd be very good at. But as I go back and forth between the autism world and the world of industry, they just get into the label, and they take the welding class out and the theater out, the music out, then the kid doesn't have a chance to have an opportunity to find out what he might be good at, or she might be good at.
Right. It is an honor to have Dr. Grandin here. I have to tell you, I was thrilled that she accepted my invitation. You know, as you were talking about the great grandparent who was talking about how they think that, you know, that they were autistic, and that, you know, are there a lot of people you're finding that are looking back on their lives now and saying, I think I was autistic? And it seems like it's a lot more widespread than we would have thought. And
well, I think there's some reasons for this. One of the things is social skills are not taught to children in the structured way they were taught in the 50s, where kids were taught to shake hands. Okay, we'd all be sitting at the dining room table, you know, it's family style, and if I reached across the table and grabbed the serving dish of mashed potatoes, my mother didn't scream no. She'd say, ask your sister to pass it. She'd give the instruction. I call that teachable moments. Okay, we're in the store and touching too much stuff. She'd say, only touch the things you're going to buy. She's giving the instruction. And that's not done as much today. Also, there were a lot of kids that excelled. They might have a kid that excels in music. But if you don't have a music class and musical instruments, how would you know that the kid was good at music? I was not good at playing musical instruments, but I tried them. You see, and then you try different things. And when it came to theater, I could care less about acting in a play, but I loved making scenery and costumes.
Okay.
That's something that can turn into a career.
Yep. Definitely. When the adults realize, looking back, that they've been autistic, do you find that there's I don't know, relief at finally knowing what has been going on their whole lives? Or are they upset?
Yeah, yes, there is. You see, there's kind of two things. The diagnosis in a kid that's fully verbal, a young kid, I think sometimes it holds them back. But where the diagnosis is helpful, and I understand you're a counselor, is understanding why their marriages or their relationships are a complete mess. By the way, another book I edited. This is 18 people diagnosed later in life.
Oh.
Found out they were autistic, and it gave them a lot of insight into why they had marital problems or relationship problems, and that was a relief to them. It was almost a relief.
Yeah.
I had a lady walk up to me at the Denver airport one time, and she was talking about my book, Thinking in Pictures. And she said, your book saved our marriage. I now understand my engineer husband.
Oh, wow.
Who was probably mildly on the spectrum.
Yeah. I'm sure that happens all the time. I'm sure there's so many people that are, all of a sudden, the light kind of is shown, and they understand what's been going on all of a sudden when they...
Well, it's such a broad spectrum. You see, you're going from Elon Musk to somebody who can't dress themselves. Bullying in school. I was bullied in school. Elon Musk was shoved down the stairs and had his face smashed in.
Oh.
Horribly bullied. Had to have surgery to correct that.
Wow.
And the only places that I was not bullied when I was a teenager was friends who shared interests. I want to really emphasize that.
Okay.
I had friends horseback riding. friends with Model Rocket Club, and friends with Electronics Lab.
I'm wondering.
That's where they're going to get friends.
Okay.
That's where they get friends.
I'm wondering too if you've noticed anything, or if you have anything you could kind of speak to about women who have had, been who are on the spectrum and didn't know, and if it's different growing up. I just kind of get the sense women don't know as easily.
Well, one of the problems with women is getting into abusive relationships. That's been a big problem.
Okay.
They really want to have a relationship, and they don't know how to get out of abusive relationships. And that can be a big problem. Now, the thing that's made my life worthwhile is having an interesting career. I just got an email recently from a parent where they took some of my advice. The doctors had told them that the kids should just go in an institution, and now the kids in college are doing well because they've read some of my books and some of my information, and that makes me really happy.
That's wonderful. That's terrific. Yeah, this was something that will definitely, somebody's bringing up, fascinated by the machine that you constructed to feel a hug. Yes. That's
Well, I got that idea from a cattle shoot at the next door neighbor's ranch near my aunt's. They were putting the cattle in that for their vaccinations. And I was always a pressure seeker. I used to get under sofa cushions, get my sister to sit on them. I like to wrap myself up really tight in blankets. And so I built this machine that was similar to cattle shoot to apply pressure. And one of the things on sensory problems that really is helpful is if the person can control it, like loud sounds, for example, like a car horn. Let the child turn it on and off. The vacuum cleaner, let the child turn it on and off. And if they can control it, then sometimes they can get to tolerate it. And then when I made the squeezing machine air operated, see, I could control it. Because when I was young, I couldn't stand being hugged. But then when I had where I could control it, then I got desensitized.
okay. So like almost practice, like let them practice.
Well, what it does is it reduces the startle response.
Okay.
I have an excessive startle response. Like the school bell would go off and I would just jump, and it felt like a dentist drill hitting a nerve. Well, the best way what should have been done is take me down to the principal's office when the school's closed and let me just turn it on and off, where I control it. And there's been some successes where that enabled the child to tolerate a buzzer on a scoreboard, for example, in the gym.
Okay.
That was helpful.
Very good to know. So maybe that's something people could talk to their schools about to help their kids.
Well, I've got in my Thinking in Pictures book, I've got a new edition that's just come out, the new Afterward, where I talk about a lot of these things.
Okay.
Because I go back and forth between the worlds, between the autism world, the industry. I do a lot of talks at businesses, and the amount of employees I see at businesses in mechanics, art, animals, and then of course computer science. I mean, half the programmers in Silicon Valley probably have at least, mild autism.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm seeing that same kid show up at a meeting, 10 years junior, addicted to video games, and has never gone shopping by himself.
Right.
Because they're getting too overprotected. What you got to do with these kids is stretch them. Don't throw them into something they can't tolerate. My first job, I'll tell you, it should not be. Super crazy takeout window with a lot of multitasking. That it should not be. I today I went into a really nice auto parts store and got new windshield wipers. They were so nice. The guy came out and put them on my car. The place was really calm. And that's the kind of store where an autistic person would be very successful. It's quiet. You've got one customer at a time. And then the person memorizes every part in the store. They're going to love them.
Okay.
You seeing that? And now it's a visual thinker. When I'm thinking about the jobs, I'm now seeing that store right now. I was just in it this morning.
Okay. So, thinking about that with the whole concept of being a visual thinker, and that really being what helped you so much to help animals and help to make the cattle industry more humane. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about that. And, I'm an animal communicator, so I know that you say that you don't communicate with animals telepathically like someone like me does. You do it in a different way because of your...
Well, basically, an animal doesn't think in verbal language. And there's been a lot of discussions about animal consciousness. Now, I'm learning more and more about how the verbal thinker works. And it's in a way, to me, it's almost more alien to me than the mathematical mind, even though I'm not good at doing higher mathematics. I'm terrible at that. But I can't believe there's still discussion with some people thinking maybe animals aren't conscious. But the more I learn about the verbal thinker, I think it's very hard for some verbal thinkers to imagine how you can have thought that's sensory-based rather than verbal-based. You see, as a visual thinker, it's easy for me also to imagine how the dog would, think in smells, think in sounds. It's a sensory-based world. And to me, it's totally obvious. Of course they're conscious. But I think some of this discussion gets down to verbal thinking versus sensory-based thinking. And I'm finding that in problem solving, the way verbal thinkers solve problems and the way visual thinkers and mathematical thinkers solve problems is very different. A verbal thinker is very top-down. You have a big theory, a big hypothesis, and you try to fit all the data into it. My kind of mind, and also the mathematical mind, takes specific examples, puts them like into boxes on a spreadsheet. All right, let's take something like jobs. Bad jobs. Chaotic store at Christmas time. McDonald's super busy takeout window. Good jobs, the auto parts store, an office supply store, ice cream shops, and movie theaters. Those are all jobs where people have been very successful in.
Okay.
And then, of course, computer programming for the mathematicians. But I'm thinking more about beginner jobs that you would do in high school.
Okay. And welcome to everybody. Thank you so much, everybody who's in the chat, by the way. I want to say hi to everyone who's here. And we have some people from other, Matt's here from, I think, England, and some people from other places overseas. So just welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm trying to put, for some reason, I can't put, it's going to switch this. 1 second. I'm going to have to reset. Hold on. I know.
Well,
My husband's looking at.
I'm trying to stay very still because there's some bandwidth issues, right? And we're on at a time where the neighbors are using internet connection.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to not move in order to.
That makes sense. Yeah. So if you could talk to us about, I was curious about this because you have a scene in the movie where we see how you relate to Chester the horse. You know that Chester needs to be hugged. How did you know that Chester needed to be hugged?
Well, that scene was a bit exaggerated with a crazy horse. Now let's talk about the stuff in the movie that really is correct.
Okay.
The stuff that's really correct is it shows visual thinking. It shows how visual thinking works. The things I built are correct. I actually did those projects.
Mm-hmm.
There's some stuff that horse was exaggerated. I mean, it's nowhere near as wild as that.
Okay.
But I like the fact that it showed visual thinking and how it works. It showed sensory problems in autism. Also, being a woman in the early 70s, in man's industry was a much bigger barrier than autism ever was. I actually did get blue testicles put on my vehicle. And where I got most of the problem was middle management.
Okay.
It was not the owners of the feedlots. It was not the people working, just actually handling the cattle. It was the foremans. That's where almost all of my trouble was.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
What I did is I recognized, and there's a scene in there where I get the editor's card.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. That scene is real. And it's actually very important because I saw that doorway to opportunity. And a lot of people don't see doorways to opportunity.
That's very interesting. Because why do you think that you were able to see that? Like, what, sometimes you might think if somebody is on the spectrum that maybe they're not going to recognize those opportunities. So what do you think it was about you that you were able to see those?
Well, also, a lot of people wouldn't have the guts to go up and get the card. And one of the things that helped me was a social skills training thing that all children in my generation did in my neighborhood. When the kids were 7 and 8, the parents had a party. We had to put our good clothes on, greet the guests, shake hands with them, serve the snacks, and learn how to talk to people politely.
Okay.
And my brother, who's not autistic, said he hated those parties, but he admitted that they helped him advance in his career in banking.
Okay. I was curious because, you're watching a movie like that and you do wonder what parts of it are real, what parts of it aren't real. And it did seem like you faced quite a lot of challenges. And I was wondering, did you have to sneak in and pretend that you were a man?
Well, I snuck into some places. The place I snuck in actually was like 20 years, was up further in the future. But I did sneak into some places. And the scene in there where they put that metal plate in there and killed those cattle, that actually did happen.
It did. Oh,
Yeah,
that
that
was
happened.
horrible.
That's really bad, and I was just furious about it.
Yeah,
And that was another foreman who did that. And
that was awful.
they showed my science teacher really nicely. They also showed a movie that I got interested in when I was in high school about optical illusions. They actually showed a clip from a movie I saw in high school science class. And I made the optical illusion room. And they weren't going to show me how to make it. They wanted me to figure it out for myself. Kids aren't figuring out enough stuff by themselves.
Yeah.
They always wanted me to figure things out.
Okay. So back to, wondering with Chester, even though, so that was a little exaggerated. And if anyone isn't familiar, there's a movie, it's I guess it's called Temple Grandin or called Temple?
It's called Temple Grandin. It's available on Amazon
Yeah.
Prime and some of the other platforms.
Yeah,
And
it's a great movie. You can rent it.
I really like the fact it showed sensory issues in autism. It showed how visual thinking works. It's very accurate on that. And I think that's important. So
So
that people can understand that.
yeah, it's great, and you can rent it. It's not expensive to rent at all. It's wonderful, really a great movie.
The other thing I like about it, you can actually build the projects off of it. You can my actual drawings appear in that movie, copies of my actual drawings.
Okay, those are yours.
The one with the scene with all the men around the desk, that's an actual copy of
Okay.
the drawing that was used to build an actual real job.
Oh, neat. Okay.
And another thing that I learned how to do, when you're weird, what you do is you sell your work instead of yourself. So the way I sold jobs is I would design a job and then I wrote about it in the cattle magazines, in some of the national livestock industry magazines. And I'd show people my drawings, and I'd show people pictures of jobs. I learned to sell my work. Also, I figured out a lot of backdoors into jobs. After I got that press pass, we had some national meetings that came to Phoenix. I was living in Arizona at the time. I went down to Phoenix Convention Center and got in some big national meetings that had $500 registration fees. I got into them for free. And then I got the cards from the editor of national magazines. You see, you need to get better at like seeing back doors into things. And then I'd write a very good article about the National Cattle Association.
Okay. And so for you being, it's like it seems like you have this sensitivity. How was it for you to be in situations that were, really difficult?
Well, it wasn't easy. And when I got out in the industry, there were some good people that helped me. There was Jim the contractor, a former Marine Corps captain starting a tiny concrete steel business. And he seeked me out to design facilities for him. We built jobs together. And, he was kind of a no-nonsense mentor. And he did things like help me set up my business. I mean, stuff like that has to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So,
just those sorts of things.
oh, we have a question. How do critical thinking skills translate in pictures? Is there a measurable process?
Well, that's a hard one. And it's kind of, well, critical thinking skills, one of the big issues is what is real information versus fake information. And, okay, I'm not going to go into any specifics on any stuff because it's too politically sensitive. I'm not going to discuss it. But let's say, the moon is made out of cream and cheese. All right, I'm just make up a little stupid example.
Mm-hmm.
And when people make a quick reaction, emotionally, you're more likely to fall for stuff that's fake. When you're forced to look at it and think about it, most people can tell what's fake information from good information, where it's where you think about it rather than just respond to it emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
You got to use your cortex. It sits up on top of the emotions. The emotions are down the face of the brain. Use that thing that's sitting up on top.
And the
Think
amygdala.
about stuff. Unless it's ridiculous. The moon's made out of cream cheese.
Mm-hmm.
That just can't.
So, okay. Now,
But in critical thinking, you see, my mind thinks in specific examples.
okay.
What are some specific examples of critical thinking? Okay, you might read something and you can just think, well, the person just lied or the person made it up. Now, in order to figure out some of that stuff, you have to have some knowledge in your database. Okay, if I was 7 years old and somebody told me the moon was made of cream and cheese, I might believe it. I remember my dad told me when I was 7 years old that a big hospital was a Wrigley's bubblegum factory, and I believed him when I was 7 years old. I certainly wouldn't believe that now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You see, so as you get more information, but you see, critical thinking, that's a very broad concept. I'd rather think about what are examples of good critical thinking. See, I'm a bottom-up thinker. So I take the bits and pieces and, sort things out.
Okay.
I also have a lot of knowledge of biology, psychology, engineering. I read some stuff. I don't know how to believe they're rubbish. Some of the stuff's too controversial to discuss, so we'll just talk about the moon being made of cream cheese. But that's something where a 7-year-old would believe that. Well, I would hope that somebody in high school would not believe that.
Right. Okay.
I hope they learn enough science to realize that that's rubbish.
Okay. Well, I mean, I was curious, one of the things you're most famous for is this widespread impact you've had on the cattle industry. I think I read 50%.
Basically what I did
Mm-hmm.
is a tendency to just say, okay, they talk about social justice, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a big, broad concept. Okay, I did something targeted. I worked on improving cattle handling facilities and how the cattle were handled. That's something targeted. Okay, if you're interested in social justice, all right, let's take something targeted. You guys put your head around. Using DNA testing to prove that somebody did not commit a crime. You see, that's something specific. Verbal thinkers overgeneralize. And I tended to go after something specific. It wasn't the whole world. It was cattle handling. See, that's something specific. Then I designed a project and then I wrote about it. But I didn't write, oh, the industry's just evil and horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about how to handle cattle correctly. I gave them how-to instructions. That's what I did. And then I do another project, and then I write up stuff in a magazine on how to build that project, how to putting just good information out there. And the other thing I find is you constantly have to go over basics. It's just like traffic. If the police weren't out there with the radar and the breathalyzer things, imagine what the freeway accident rate would be.
Mm-hmm.
You constantly have to keep monitoring traffic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to have a racetrack out on the freeway. Well, cattle handling is kind of the same thing. I mean, you constantly have to monitor how many cattle you bring up, not scream at them. You still have to always work on basics. because people can slip back into old bad practices and not realize it. So when there's new people coming in, so there's always a need to talk about basics, and then as I add new information to it. But you write, it's not abstract what I did. I mean, let's go back to the DNA thing. Well, you got a successful case, write it. Where you use the DNA to show that the guy did not commit that murder. You see, that's specific.
Okay.
See, one of the problems is a lot of activists, it gets too vague. We've got to figure out how do we solve some actual problems. Like, for example, I just found out today we're wasting 30 to 40% of our food. That's creating methane in dumps. That's pretty atrocious. Okay, now that's something that you could work on targeting that.
Mm-hmm.
You see, if you did activism on that, you'd probably do more good than more general kind of activism. But you see, for me, nothing's abstract.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that what you're doing at this point? Are you still like working in that? I know you're a professor right now at Colorado State University.
Well, I'm still teaching my course in livestock handling, and one of the things I have the students do, I want them to learn how to use scientific databases. So they can pick out a subject in animal behavior and look it up on different scientific databases. I want them to learn how to use the library online. A lot of students don't know how to do that.
So
that's one of the things and that's a skill that be useful in any field.
okay.
And the other thing right now, the age I'm at now, is I want to help the young students. They're going to be the leaders for tomorrow. We have to solve problems, not just talk about it, not just gripe about it online. How do we actually fix things? How do we actually solve things? I'm picking out specific things you can actually work on that are doable.
Okay. So you mentioned the methane gas. Is that one of the primary, like, is that?
Well, let's look at the methane. Let's look at methane mitigation. Mm-hmm. We could get half our targets just by repairing oil field equipment. Just repairing.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
That's not even that expensive to do. And on some of the big stuff, you might be able to pay for it on methane capture. But you see, for me, that's not abstract. I actually see the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a friend that's a chemist and works in physiology, and she goes, oil field equipment, I wouldn't understand that. Well, I looked up, some diagrams for some of this stuff for gas distribution. I don't know, it's not that complicated.
Mm.
You see, that's the mechanical mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to work on stuff we can actually fix. Another thing we can fix is food waste. Okay, again, that's something targeted. Okay, cattle put out methane. Yes, I know that. Somebody claims they could feed them a teaspoon of something and stop that. I'm not going to believe that quite yet. I read about that, but I got to have a lot more proof before I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we got to look at on a grazing animal, some people look at them as like environment wreckers. The very best grazing land in the U.S. was originally, grazed by bison. That's where our finest land is for growing crops. That land was made by grazing animals. 30% of all the land mass of the world is grazing lands. We've got to raise food on it. And if you do it right, you will improve the land. If you do grazing wrong, it wrecks land. You do it right with the right, pasture rotation systems, you will improve the land. I'm getting very interested in these systems. You've got some really good innovators out there that are integrating cattle and crops together. So you might raise corn, soy. Every third year, you put a cover crop on there and graze some cattle on it, and integrate the cattle with the land, and then you don't have to use as much Roundup and chemicals. I'm not suggesting banning it. You see, this is sort of more of a hybrid approach, where you greatly reduce the use of this stuff, and you can make a win-win situation. But it's something specific, and also it's very local. What works in one place doesn't work somewhere else. You have to have extremely good local advice.
Okay.
But we've got to find practical solutions for solving things.
Okay. So you kind of gotten more broad-based, whereas you started out more, it sounds like you started out doing things like helping the cattle have a more humane dipping and...
The cattle handling's gotten a whole lot better. The cattle industry's put out tons and tons of workshops on low-stress handling.
Okay.
That's gotten a whole lot better. But now at the age I'm at right now, I'm thinking about, I've improved cattle handling. Where do cattle fit into things? And I've been learning more and more about the land. It's always good to go across disciplines. About 3 or 4 years ago, they had an agronomist come into our animal science department and talk about how grazing animals created the best cropland that we have in all of the U.S. And that was a big light bulb moment. We've got to get away from monoculture and get the crops and the animals together.
Okay.
And we've got to figure out how to solve problems. I was reading a fascinating article today on fusion power. And I got to thinking, there's about 5 different technologies they're working on. Which one's going to work? I mean, let's say the big bankers, the financial companies are financing this stuff. Well, how do you pick out which technology might actually work?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got to thinking, the one that uses liquid helium, I don't think that's going to be sustainable. We'll run out of helium. That's probably not going to work. You see, because I know something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's for the mathematicians to figure out how to do fusion. But if I'm going to use massive amounts of helium, that's probably not going to work.
Okay.
Because I'll run out of helium. Also, they'll put every MRI scanner in the whole world out of business. That'd be a real mess.
Was there an area that you saw working? I mean, was there one of those
Because
options?
the thing of fusion and stuff, I can only look at it. This is for the mathematicians to figure out, not me. But let's say you've got investors putting money into this. I can't use something that if they could cool it with liquid nitrogen, well, that's a piece of cake.
Okay.
Helium.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's an element on the periodic table. There's a finite resource. I was reading that this morning.
Okay.
And so if I was going to pick out a technology, they all look really, they look like stuff right out of Star Trek. They look like Star Trek, warp drive. That's what they look like. They look like a set out of a science fiction movie. And which one's going to work? Boy, this will solve a lot of problems. Oh man, it'd be perfect power plant. No nuclear waste.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Why am I reading this stuff? Why am I reading an article in Nature magazine about fusion power? Because I'm really trying to figure out in the future where cat's going to fit into this. Well, I think grazing animals going to fit into it because we have so much land mass.
Mm-hmm.
They can only be grazed. You've got the outback of Australia, half the size of the U.S. There's not enough water in the wells to grow crops. You would instantly deplete the wells, but you can put livestock. You have to be careful not to put too many on. Now, the grazing animal, I think it's got a really good future. There's a lot of stuff that's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at things I've done all my life. I've improved cattle handling. Now we have to work on maintaining cattle handling.
Right. Okay.
You know how to do it now. You have to work on maintaining it, sort of like traffic. You got to maintain it. I'll tell you right now, I was out on the big I-80, that I call it the super slab, goes across the United States, and boy, they've got GPS things that tattle back to the corporate office with the trucks, let me tell you. Brand name trucks,
Mm-hmm.
they were staying right there, 65 miles an hour in a 75 mile an hour zone, and the GPS was wrapped back to the office. I never saw so many light trucks. It's amazing.
So do you feel, because you did so much early on, for those who are not familiar with what Dr. Grandin has done, she did make it so that the handling of cattle was just more humane.
She proven for people that have small farmers. I got Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals, to small farm. There's a lot of the really innovative stuff with combining crops and animals is going to be innovated by small producers.
Do you feel like that is more humane, like that there's humane aspects of that for animals coming? That
Well, it gets down to management. We get into the whole thing about big versus small. Big's not bad. Big is fragile. And when I brought that up 5 years ago, people thought I was kind of crazy. Well, during COVID, it demonstrated big is fragile. All the supply chain disruptions and things like that. Now, the thing about big is when it works, You can have a very humane, large meatpacking plant. You can have really good food safety there. You can have it work just great. But when you break it, you're really in trouble. You see, when it's working, yes, it's cheaper because you have economy of scale. Now, if I have a more distributed supply chain, it's more robust. It doesn't break as easily, but it will be more expensive. You're always going to have that trade-off. I don't care whether it's meat or whether it's clothing. Well, that's another industry. It's really wasteful. It's clothing. Boy. Okay, we won't get into that right now. But that's an industry that could have a lot of improvements. And right now, a lot of farmers are trying to put in small slaughter plants. And this is something we need to do. And there's a lot of bureaucracy making it difficult, too. I just can't believe some stupid bureaucracy.
They're trying to put in more what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch
little,
that.
tiny, small processing plants.
Oh,
Where
okay.
they might do 20 cattle a week in them. I'm talking very small.
Okay.
And then that farmer would sell right directly to consumer.
Okay.
And you have a more distributed supply chain, it will be more expensive.
What is the reason for that? Is that
Well,
to be?
all right, let's just look at it this way. Electric power bill. Oh, you have a big place, and you divide up the power bill between 1,000 cattle. The amount of electricity you use per head goes down. All right, let's look at feed costs. If I am buying feed by the train car load, it's cheaper than if I buy it in a whole bunch of individual bags that are like horse feed. It's called economy of scale. You see, if I buy feed by the train car load, it's 30% cheaper. See, that's your economy of scale. And that's true for all kinds of things.
Okay, so, and do you?
And so something that's smaller, it's going to be more expensive. But the advantage you have if you distribute your supply chain into more smaller producers, when something goes wrong, you still have, you'll still have meat, or you'll still have some other product that you want.
Okay. And, I should probably just throw in, for those that are in the chat that are, maybe not, obviously this is the animal communication show, but I think it's important to talk about steps. Dr. Grandin has found ways to improve an industry that traditionally was horrendous in the way that they've treated animals. She's done things to.
In the 80s, the handling of cattle was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And one of the things that improves things is when you have big buyers insisting on standards. And I wrote guidelines for standards. And when you have big companies enforcing these standards, then things change. But you need to have clear standards. You cannot say handle cattle properly. What does handle cattle properly mean? They don't put signs up on the highway that say drive at a reasonable speed. You don't see that on a sign.
Right.
Number on it. And then the police have a device to measure how fast a car goes. You see, that's an objective standard. And I was just out on the big highway that goes across the country. I never saw so many plate trucks because the buyers have electronics on those trucks. Tells the office how fast they're going.
Yep.
It's amazing the behavior of the trucks changed. I couldn't believe it. And this equipment just in the last 5 years has become really common. I hadn't been out on that road for a while. It was just amazing. Brand name trucks, I'd follow them for 10 miles. They didn't deviate out of 65. I just did this just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so I mean, what Dr. Grandin has been able to do is to take this industry that was just absolutely horrendous, and she's been able to incorporate these different things like she was able to use the detail-orientated mind that she has because of her autism to be able to see things the way animals saw them and make it less stressful.
I get asked all the time if cattle are afraid of getting slaughtered. I can tell you what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the dark. And if you put a light on the entrance of a chute, they'll go in. Or you move a light to get reflections to go away. they will go. That's what they're afraid of. And if you look at stress hormone levels, stress hormone levels in a slaughterhouse and in just a vaccinating chute, they range from high to low, depending on how good the handling is. But they're the same ranges. Because that's another thing I've looked at. They're very into what they see. There's some piece of string hanging down, or a reflection on a puddle that's wiggling. That'll make them stop.
Because you would literally crawl like a cow. Like you would literally get in there.
That's what I did. I'd get in the chute and see what the animals were seeing. And in this book on Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals, and animals also get afraid of novel objects, something new that just suddenly appears. We did an interesting experiment with horses. My student, Megan Morgan, did an experiment where she walked young fillies and colts past a child's plastic play set. That's probably about fit in a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot cube, and had a little slide and a swing on it. And she did this at a slow walk, and she walked the horses by this until the horse no longer reacted. And she measured stopping and raising the head up and the nostrils flailing. There was no way we were going to do this to gallop. And then when the play set was rotated, the horse thought it was something new. Now think about it. This stapler was the slide on the play set.
Okay.
Now when I turn it, you see how it looks like a different object.
Yeah.
Turn it, it looks like a different object. And if that had been done in a gallop, somebody would have been dumped. And then I repeated the experiment just informally with a large green plastic chair at a horse class. And we had the riders just walk by it until they no longer stopped, no longer looked at it, rotated that chair 90 degrees. There were 6 or 7 horses there, and 3 came to a hard stop. And that would have been bad at a gallop. I made darn sure we only did it at a walk.
Okay.
Now we actually got a paper online about the rotation of a complex novel object, and you can look it up on Google Scholar. Just came out.
And this was all part of, like I had mentioned at the beginning, when I started out as an animal communicator and was kind of trying to hone my craft and taking courses to learn how to teach it. Dr. Grandin's book, Animals in Translation in particular, was one of the books that was we were advised to read. So, I was curious, how do you see, or what were things about that book that you really think are important that apply to people's house pets? I mean, obviously you've had all this experience with cattle.
Let's look at house pets. I think a lot of dogs are afraid of a lot of stuff. I did a big Zoom call about a year ago, 400 people that had dogs and cats. And the number one question that came in was, my dog's afraid of the vet. And I think part of the problem is dogs don't get exposed to enough things, so they're just afraid of everything. And in another book I have on Animals Make Us Human, Animals Make Us Human, I talk about the animal that Jack Penn's kept emotional systems. And animals need to get exposed to more things. It's just like some of these autistic kids. They're not getting out and getting exposed to enough stuff, and then they're afraid of everything.
Yeah.
I think a lot of dogs, are afraid. Now, of course, during COVID, dogs had a chance to be with their owner 24/7, and there's going to be some problems with getting the dogs to tolerate a person being at work again.
Yeah. Because
one of my friends has a dog that was just fine with being home when she was at work. Well, they went on a 2-week camping trip in a camper where the dog was with them 24/7. They got back, she went back to work, and the dog ate a door, like chewed.
Oh my gosh.
Never had done anything like this. Chewed the whole edge of the door and had to be replaced.
Wow.
And this is a dog that for years, when she was at work, was just fine. And I suggested that she gradually getting used to more and more times, but he actually had wrecked the door, had to be replaced.
That's dangerous for him too. He's ingesting door.
And that's a dog that had never done that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of clients with these issues
had
too.
Been just with them 24/7 when they were in the camper.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. A lot of people contact me about going back to work. And you talked in your book about PTSD and fear with dogs, and you relate sort of the autistic mind and some of the things that you've experienced to what animals, the way that they experience the world. And I think that's really interesting for people.
Well, the thing is, in a visual thinker, also fear is my main emotion. A lot of anxiety is not controlled with antidepressant medication, but a huge amount of anxiety. And I talk about that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And I would, if you have a lot of anxiety, I recommend reading that. But the thing is, it's a sensory-based world, and sometimes I find it like I'll go into a place and put a light on the entrance of a chute, and I almost can't believe how well it works, especially in indoor facilities. It doesn't work as well in outdoor, like indoor facilities.
Yeah.
It really works. Duct tape a light on the entrance of a chute, and they go in easier.
It's incredible. Just that little change, how much a difference it makes to
They
animals.
don't like walking into the dark, and they also don't like walking from like real sunny, bright into a dark building because you get kind of the dark movie theater syndrome.
Yeah.
And they don't like that. And then if you open a door up on the other side of the building so you see through it,
Yep.
Then they'll go in. And I just got down and looked at what they were looking at. But that was obvious to me because I was a visual thinker. But if you're a verbal thinker who thinks in words, you would say, well, why was I doing that? And when I first started doing that in my 20s, I did not know that other people just thought in words. I simply did not know.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. To you, it's just sort of, I think, like obvious. It's how you think, but because of that book, especially Animals in Translation, people, somebody just made a comment in the chat. Something that we see as so simple makes a huge difference when you see it through the lens of an animal, and that's so true. I mean, that's kind of the whole basis. The whole reason we do animal communication is to help people see things through the lenses of the animals,
Well,
and even
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is
no, go
something
ahead.
where I have a problem with the timing. That's still something I have a problem with.
Oh no, you're fine.
The thing you have to do to understand animals, get away from verbal language. What is it seeing, smelling, seeing? What is it sensing? It's a sensory-based world, not a verbal, word-based world. And
Yeah.
those senses are associated with emotions. And in Animals Make Us Human, I talk about PANCSIP emotional systems. All animals and people have them. You've got fear, then you've got anger, then you've got separation distress. And separation distress, like the dog is home alone chewing up the house, that's a different emotion than fear. Then you have seek, that's the urge to explore. Another thing that's a problem, in a lot of the scientific literature, the neuroscientists will call it seek, but some other behavior scientists will call it exploration drive. Same thing. Or you see some papers will talk about bold versus shy animals. Well, that's the same as low and high fear, bold and shy. Or a high seek or a low seek is the same as a high exploration and a low exploration. Also, you might see the trait of curiosity. Also would go in the seek category. Then, of course, you have the sex drive. You've got mother-young nurturing, that's the oxytocin system, and you've got play. And these are emotional systems, and all people and animals have got.
Yeah, and just thinking about it from that perspective really helps you to understand it from the animal's perspective, and just being able to think, I was reviewing your book, even though I'd read it years ago and I've looked at it through the years, but I was reviewing it, preparing for an interview, and it was reminding me how much it does matter to my dog when she goes from the outdoors into the indoor. She really does. It really affects her, going from like the light outside into the dimmer inside, and really thinking about that, like how much that would bother me, if it was that much of a transition for me. We really have to, it really makes you think, how much their world is sometimes like we're oblivious to the things that they're dealing with and the stress that that can cause them. And that's what you brought through your book and through the various books. And,
Well,
you
another
know,
really simple thing you can do to help your dog when you go to the vet is make sure the first experience is the puppy goes to the vet's good experience, like some treats. It's very important that an animal's first experience, any animal, was with a new person, a new place, like a vet clinic, maybe a horse, a new trailer, is a good first experience. Because if that first experience is bashing your head on it, you're going to be afraid of it. Also, help out at the veterinarian, give your puppy a non-slip floor to stand on. You know, slipping, and the same thing's true for cattle. They need a non-slip floor to stand on.
okay.
Also, you need to teach puppies to tolerate having their paws held and manipulated. And when they let you manipulate their paws and they don't try to pull back, you give them a treat. And then nail trims are going to be no big deal.
Right.
You know, if you see then going to the veterinarian will be fun rather than horrible, because lots of times they're not reacting to the shot, getting the vaccine or whatever, they're reacting to how they're held, or they're sliding around on the table. So you might want to get your dog used to a bath mat that you bought with a rubber back on it, and then when you go to the vet clinic, put that on the table and put your dog on that, and you get a non-slip floor.
Yeah.
You know, wash it. Because the vet says, well, I'm busy, I don't have time to wash that mat. Now you just suggest having the dog owner bring that in, and
That's a great
and give the
idea.
animal a non-slip floor. And the same thing with cattle. They go berserk when they're slipping on the floor.
Yeah. Well, that was like your your dipping machine, right? Where you had the steps and then
You see, and having it so when they went
Flea
in, it was
dipping.
non-slip floor, and it worked perfectly. And then, unfortunately, that scene where they put that metal plate in there killed the cow. That actually did happen,
oh, that was
the
awful.
way it showed it. And we took the metal plate out, and it finally worked again. And it was the foreman that did that.
Oh, yeah, that was heartbreaking. Yeah, Dr. Grandin had designed something where the cattle could step down into the bath, which is like a flea dipping bath,
Well,
and they're
the
immersed.
non-slip entrance going in,
Yeah.
and the movie shows it absolutely accurate. And the drawing for that entrance is actually in the movie. You could go with it.
It's, yeah, and somebody went and they covered it. They put a,
They put a sheet of metal over
Sheet
the
of metal.
rough concrete, so then the cattle just slid it. And then what happened is it flipped over backwards in that narrow dipping vat and breathed in water, and it killed them.
oh, you
Oh,
must
that
have just
happened.
been,
I came out there, I was just furious.
yeah,
Awful. And we took that metal plate out, and then it worked. Yeah, I know, anyway, that was bad. But I think the thing on working on improving things is figuring something target. Okay, designing cattle handling equipment and teaching people cattle handling, that's something targeted. The other thing that was really important in making what I did effective is writing about it. And over a whole lot of years, I've had to write a lot of articles with very similar stuff because there's new people coming in all the time.
okay.
And instead of criticizing, I was taught a long time ago, sell your own product, don't bash the competition. Instead of saying, well, how horrible those people are, the way they handle those cattle, all right, this is how you do it. And then I worked on training buyers to evaluate things. Boy, I saw more change in 1999 when we implemented the McDonald's audits. And boy, the big plants, they had to repair all the busted stuff they had in there. They had to start managing them. And I saw more change in 1999 when we had 3 big buyers inspecting them than I had seen in my 25-year career prior to that. Big buyers can make change. But we've got to do sensible things. All right, let's look at methane coming off of, gas distribution equipment. That can be measured with satellites. I've been
Okay.
learning more and more about that. And then you can have before maps, and you can publish the maps. You put the satellite images over the maps, they're real easy to read. And start working on reducing that. But again, that's something targeted. It's also something from an engineering standpoint you can actually do relatively easily. I think another thing we've got to be working on is food waste. That's a bunch of methane coming out of dumps. We're wasting disgusting amounts of food.
Okay.
I like to work on stuff that's targeted.
And do
rather
you-
than just, in general, everything's just horrible.
And is your way of doing that through your students, like, to work on this now?
and
Is that where you're at?
Students, and I have 3 students now that are professors. I'm very, very happy about that.
Wow. Okay.
And like Lily, one of my students, she's doing a lot of same kind of stuff, working on things.
Okay.
But
So you're teaching the future too.
Oh,
Future.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of talks going around, and we need to just, we have to figure out, how do we actually fix something? Not just complain about it until everything's horrible.
Do you find your
And
students?
have something that's relatively targeted. Okay, like on the social justice thing, I'm going to use the example of DNA testing to show that this person did not commit that murder.
Mhm.
Then after you do that successfully, write about it. Then write about how to do it, rather than just complaining about how horrible everything is.
Are you finding your students want this? They want to change
Oh, yeah, that's
coming
the
in
reason why
like
they're-
that's their
well,
mindset?
that's the reason why they're in this. They want to improve things.
Okay.
But we also have to, I'm very concerned today, we've got a lot of young people growing up, totally removed from the world of the practical. They don't know how this stuff gets over here in shipping containers. I bet students didn't even know what a shipping container was, prior to COVID. Now they do know what it is.
Okay.
Everyone thinks everything's coming out of a computer. You got warehouses full of computers that are running stuff we do online. You got warehouses full of computers. You've got gigantic warehouses. So when you buy things online, there's this huge physical infrastructure. So a lot of people sort of aren't even aware that it exists.
Uh-huh. Yeah. They think it kind of magics here from the computer.
Well, it's not magic.
Yeah. Very
Our
interesting.
problem is that COVID made people sick, and right now we have a huge shortage of electronic chips. Started with a fire in Japan, burned up a critical factory. That's an example of biggest fragile. And then other factories got slowed down due to COVID. We're right now building factories to build electronic chips. They're going to be more expensive. Instead of being 50 cents a piece, they may be $2 a piece.
Okay. Interesting.
And yeah, big, it's fragile.
Well.
Not good to put all, the old thing, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
It's basically that.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating, and I have so much I would love to talk to you about, but I know you have to go. I know you have. I want to
Yeah, I
be
gotta
respectful.
spend the night in the hotel tonight and get up early because
Oh.
of parking is
Ugh.
horrible.
Gosh.
Because it's Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah,
I'm
right.
not looking forward to that. I have to park in the lot way out on the edge of the airport and
Oh,
wait for a
no.
bus to come and get me. I just looked up online. It said you need to allow an extra 45 minutes to get in from the outline.
Oh.
Yeah, I just looked at that now before I got on here.
Oh, geez. Is that you go to Denver Airport? I know that one is.
Denver Airport, that's right. Denver
I was-
Airport.
I actually did my acupressure class in Denver at Tallgrass Institute, and I was like amazed how long it took me to get from parking my car. Just the whole, it was a lot. It was stressful.
At Denver Airport, if I'm one of the far out gates, it takes me half an hour
Yeah.
to walk off the plane, walk through the terminal,
It's a lot.
and get on the shuttle and get out to the more close in lot.
Uh-huh.
Get out the gate where I have to pay for the parking. That takes half an hour. I can't do it any faster.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Just to get from getting off the plane to my car going out the where I paid for the parking. 30 minutes about as fast as I can do it in.
Gosh, yeah, it's a big airport. Yeah. Well, yeah, so we don't want to keep you, but we really appreciate you being here. I know so many people were excited to have you here, and I'm sure people are going to catch this too on the replay. If this is, by the way, for those of you, if you came in and benefited from this at all, please do. We appreciate you subscribing and liking, and you hit the, but Dr. Grandin, thank you so much. It's really been an honor to have you here from, learning about you many, many, many years ago when I started out to following your work and to have you here
Well,
tonight.
it's been great to be here.
Thank
Really
you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
I
so
guess
much.
I guess I'll sign off now, and thank you for having me.
Yes, have a good trip.
I will. Thank you.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. Happy
All right.
Thanksgiving.
Bye. Happy Thanksgiving.